At a recent Toastmasters meeting, I was asked the question, what is your favorite way to lie with statistics? To which I responded, 85% of all statistics are made up on the spot, including that one. And 5 people out of 4 don't understand them. The fact of the matter is, a lot of people simply will give you statistics and then interpret them for you, and you become victims of their interpretation. I think there's no need to. So what I'm going to do today is give you ways of looking at the actual data so that you'll know a little bit more about what's going on and won't have to just listen to what you're told. Now, before I start, I want to be honest with you guys. I am a doctor, but I'm not a physician. I'm a doctor of economics, but that means I'm an expert in actually interpreting data. So with that in mind, let's look at what the data tells us about COVID-19. First of all, let's realize the coronavirus disease is COVID-19. That's what the D stands for. The virus itself is severe acute respiratory syndrome, SARS, coronavirus 2. So coronavirus is not wrong because of COVID. It's simply a different name for it. Now, it's called the coronavirus or a coronavirus because of the crown that is on the surface of the virus. Corona, of course, being a crown. This is the kind of statistic we all know and all get scared by. There have been over 1 million cases of coronavirus worldwide. 61,199 people have died as of this morning, and 238,492 have recovered. They never talk about the recovery, folks. That's a real statistic we should keep in mind as we think about what's going on. Now, this is the kind of numbers that they like to show us. Worldwide, there are over 1 million cases, and the United States has had a quarter of those right now. Spain is second, and then Italy, Germany, France, and number 6 is China. Now, I have the statistics for all 240 countries. I'm not going to show them all to you at once. But is that a real story right now? Is the United States the worst country with respect to the total cases? Well, let's look at the number of cases in the United States. First of all, you can see they're centered in New York City, or New York. This is the map worldwide, statewide, nationwide. You'll see it all. And this is what has us scared. And this is why people want to live in Wyoming instead of New York. This is an example of the kind of statistics that they can show you, and they don't mean anything to you. We can see a graph of the total cases, and it's going upward. It's growing fast. But what's happening to that? The number of deaths is going up. It's happening fast. But the question is, how fast and everything else? Well, there's a basic rule. If I have the disease and I give it to one other person, then 2 of us will have it. So it goes from 1 to 2. The next day, we'll each give it to another person, and it goes to 4. And then 8 and 16, etc. Or if I gave it to 2 other people, it would be 1, 3, 9, etc. So how fast is that line going to go up? Well, there's a trick to looking at this. And instead of looking at the graphs that way, you look at how fast it's spreading. What is the exponential rate of growth? To do that, you look at the graphs using a logarithmic curve. That's how fast it's growing. Now, don't worry. There will not be a math test at the end of this speech. But looking at these graphs says, is it growing faster? And you can see around March 22nd, the rate increased. And of cases, and similarly around the 14th, the rate increased for deaths. This is what we want to look at to see how fast it's growing. because this tells us how contagious the disease is. Don't trust all the numbers, folks. These are the numbers for China. Is there anybody here who actually believes China just stopped seeing cases suddenly, magically on the 21st of February? No. They stopped testing and they stopped reporting. So the numbers aren't always good, and I certainly don't believe that they're all being healed that fast. So look at the numbers with a grain of salt, but when we look at them, we'll at least have a sense of what's going on. And this is really what I want to give you guys, is a way to analyze the data, a way to think about the data in ways which is not what the media is doing. So if we look at the number of cases, as we showed before, 25% of the cases roughly are in the United States, more than twice as much as the next country, which is Spain, and then Italy a little bit below that, and so on. And they're new cases, total deaths, and whatever. But is that fair? I mean, the United States is a whole lot bigger country than Spain. So what happens if instead of looking at the number of cases, we look at the number of cases per million population? Or we look at the number of deaths per million of population. Well, there, we're going to see a very different picture. There are 844 deaths. Of the 5 I showed you before, we have the lowest number of deaths per person. I'm sorry, the second lowest to Germany, the lowest number of cases per person. So just looking at the raw numbers is misleading. So when you look at the numbers, or when you're told the numbers, think about what that means on a population basis. That's a more useful way to consider what's going on. In fact, 126 countries have more deaths per million than the United States. And 180 countries have more cases per million than the United States. So are we the worst case? I'm not going to analyze the numbers for you people. That's lying with statistics. You can look at that yourself. Now, if you look at the number of corona cases in the US, it's a relatively straight line, logarithmically. In other words, we've been growing at a constant rate. The infection has been relatively straight. And that's a sign that we're not doing much to improve the situation, and we're not doing much to make it worse. It's just happening on a consistent basis. But let's look at another number. They tell us that the mortality rate for the coronavirus would be between 2 and 3%. Well, if I look at the number of people who've already died who have the virus, remember, they've got the virus, they are already dead. So there are a whole bunch of them who may die in the future. 2.67% of the people who have the virus in the US have already died. The number is almost twice as high worldwide. Similarly, 20% of the people who've gotten the virus so far have recovered worldwide, only 5% in the US. Twice as many people roughly are dead or have had serious cases as the US. But if you look at the number of people who died versus the number of people who are dead or recovered, that is, the number of people who no longer have the virus for one reason or another, 36%, 36.9% have died in the US, and 20.4% have died worldwide. That says 7% of the cases are resolved, and the other 93 are still active in the US. Is this the way you normally think about things? Is this the way the media normally repeats things? Do you know? But if you can look at those numbers yourself, you can get your own picture. You don't have to listen to what they tell you. And that's a chance for you to take control over your own fears. Now, I said we hadn't done much to decrease the number of cases, but if you look at a straight line here, this black line, you'll see that the number of cases is getting lower than that line. What that means is that the rate of infection is going down. And you know what happened when that rate started to go down? We started to quarantine. Is quarantining working? Yes. And this graph shows you that. This is a way of knowing it and proving it to yourself. Now again, no math has a quiz about how that line and whatever was generated. I'll let you just trust me on that. It is working. Do we want to stop it? I'll let you draw that conclusion. It's working now. It used to be that they told us not to wear masks. Now they're telling us to wear masks. Well, the best way I could look at the evidence on masks is to compare two countries, the United States and Taiwan. In Taiwan, when people get sick or they're worried about getting sick, they put on a mask, medical mask. Now realize that you can pass on the coronavirus before you have symptoms. If you're wearing the mask, you're not going to get someone else sick, is the theory. So even though it's not protecting you from getting sick, it's protecting everybody else. And that means you're going to be less contagious. Well, if you look, and we do a comparison here, the United States and Taiwan, both of whom have to deal with this, got the virus on the same day. In the United States, there are 844 cases per million population. Taiwan, 15. In the United States, there are 23 people dead per million population. In Taiwan, 0.2. Is that because they wear masks? Again, that's what the data suggests. You may have a different interpretation, but if you look at the data, now you have a chance to do that analysis. Coronavirus in Taiwan, you can see it's much below that straight line as they get more and more safety oriented. And there was a period of time when there weren't enough masks in Taiwan. There are now. In fact, I just got a message from my sister-in-law in Taiwan that said they're allowed to send masks to their relatives in the States. When those masks started to come online, you can see the rate of infection started to drop considerably. For those of you who are interested in my data sources, I started with these two, the Worldometers info.coronavirus. Well, those are the two. I'm not going to read them to you. That's where I got my data from, and the data that I showed you is from today's data. If you'd like to see those data sources, or if you'd like to look at the spreadsheet, it's a simple spreadsheet that I use to generate my data. Send me an email, and I will send you what you want. Although I'll warn you, you may get on my mailing list. So that's basically it. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask.
I have a question, Michael. Marsha.
Yes.
Okay.
Hi, Marsha.
Here's what I'm thinking. I follow your rationale, but my question is, what this is not taking in consideration is the population density, because you cannot compare Taiwan and the US. I would be comfortable comparing Taiwan and New York because of the population density. A lot of people living crowded together in cities. So I don't know, so that's why I don't feel comfortable comparing Taiwan with national numbers. But I thought it was amazing overall compared to what we hear in the news and the way the numbers are being portrayed. I thought it was enlightening. Thank you.
Thank you, and you're right. You have to look at a number of different ways to cut the data. I haven't cut all of them, but at least with a little work, you can get to them yourself. And that's what I really wanted to bring forth to you guys today. Anyone else? I will share one other theory with you that someone shared with me just because I got the floor here. There is a theory that China knew about the coronavirus for months before they actually reported it. There's a lot of traffic between China and particularly California, which had a particularly bad flu season this year. And there's a theory that actually we were infected earlier in that bad flu season, got us through part of the coronavirus early and started our herd immunity. And that's why California's rate of infection is so much lower than the models predict, whereas other places like New York are right on target. So with that,
Mike, I actually have a question for you, Steve. This is not so much data-driven, excellent data-driven presentation. I completely agree with you. The media is not giving us the facts. That's not their priority. I know this because I've studied media virtually my whole adult life. That said, on the opinion side of this, there's a lot of conspiracy theorists that I know, and they are, and I wanted to ask you about this, and it might sound crazy to you guys, but bear with me. A few of my friends who are conspiracy theorists feel like that the numbers in China that we haven't heard about, Shanghai, Beijing, being 4 times more populated than the US, potentially Hong Kong, don't have cases over there because they were prepared for this, but they made sure the disease somehow made its way over here so as to plunder the US economy and get us to our knees financially by declaring a financial war on us. For China to kind of dominate us that way, since militarily they may not be able to take on our military, which is still probably the strongest in the world. What do you think about that conspiracy theory? Do you think there's anything to it? Virology and financial plundering against the U.S. by China. What do you think about that?
Okay, well, this steps outside of the data and steps into a different realm. Frankly, I think number one, if you look at how fast their numbers are driven, the only way that their actual viral count themselves could have dropped that fast is if they have a cure. And frankly, they could make an awful lot of money selling us the cure. Whereas right now, our economy is being driven down. Our unemployment rate is approaching 5% now. And we're looking at the potential for a Great Depression coming out of this. And that means we're not going to be buying Chinese goods. So the economic cost to China is probably too high for that. That said, I would point out to you, just because I'm an economist and have to say this, we have a stimulus package that's going into place. Someone's got to pay for that $1 trillion stimulus package, and we pay for it with debt. And who buys American debt? China.
Yeah.
Just share that with your conspiracy theorists.
Thank you, Michael.
You're welcome.
Michael, no one seems to relate to the fact that Taiwan is doing such an excellent job compared to the rest of the world. Everybody's looking at mainland China and not at Taiwan. There's some way in which we can get people to refer to Taiwan, which is actually a democracy, as opposed to the way they did it in mainland China, which is not a democracy?
Well, I got a couple of things to say on that, but I'm going to have to get kind of political here. First of all, if you actually look at Taiwan, it's an incredibly corrupt government right now. At least that's the theory from my Taiwanese contacts. My wife is from Taiwan. So I wouldn't really call it democracy per se. And that's a whole set of politics I could give a speech on. But a lot of what they do, Taiwan treats medical problems and dangers much more seriously, as much more contagious than we do. And that's why I think we saw the numbers. That's why I think the numbers suggest to me, and I mentioned the masks as the reason, one of the main things that's going on in Taiwan. Because my brother-in-law in Taiwan is still going to the office every day. They wear masks in the group meetings, but they haven't closed down. They're just primarily being careful, keeping distances, but they're not sheltering. They're wearing masks, and keeps them from passing one way or the other. And that's my personal best guess into what's going on at this point. It's the culture to begin with.
I have a question as well about, these are cases that have tested positive. What about all the testing that is not taking place? We have not had enough test kits, and a lot of people are not getting tested.
That is one of the problems with the statistics that are available at this point. The statistics which I just saw today, the United States has 50% more test kits than Germany, which is the number 2. However, that's not more per capita. We're a little down on that. And yes, all that we can look at, this is the limit on the data, all I can look at is the information we have on the tests reported. And that is why, if you look at the data I showed on China initially, there was a jump because they started doing testing and reporting for a brief period of time. And the data shows that. But right now I have to accept the limitations on the data.
But you only have what you get. You can't make up numbers.
Well, I can,
Well, yeah.
but that wouldn't be honest.
No, it would not. Any other questions? Well, thank you, Michael. Great job. Okay, stop